Today we are looking at the highly esteemed and very well reviewed Daniel 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the vessels of the house of God. This alone begs the reader to ask a few questions. One, why is God giving the king of Judah into the hands of King Nebuchadnezzar? And two, what is Judah? I thought the Israelites lived in Israel. What is Judah? Well, if we look at Daniel 1 in a vacuum, we're going to have a hard time understanding what the heck is going on. So let's look at the broader context of the Bible just so we can understand some of these details. So we're going to go way back in the biblical narrative where God first creates the universe, and then the first humans, namely Adam and Eve, they have children, Cain, Abel, and the unfortunately forgettable Seth. It's through Seth's lineage that we eventually get to Noah and the story of the flood, and through Noah's lineage that we get to Abraham, with whom God makes his famous covenant. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you. And I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant. And I will give to you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. At this point, you might be asking yourself, why are we talking about Abraham in a video about Daniel? And to that I say, shut your mouth hole and we'll get there. So Abraham has a son named Isaac. We get the story of the binding of Isaac, but he makes it out okay. And eventually he has two sons, Jacob and Esau. Now Jacob is a really important character in the biblical story as a whole because God gives him a significant new name, that being Israel. And Israel has 12 sons, and these sons become the 12 tribes of Israel. These 12 tribes eventually become a kingdom, and a kingdom needs a king, and that's where we get the story of David, King David. Okay, now bear with me here. I know this is a lot, but we need this in order to understand what the heck is going on. Through King David's death, his kingship is passed to Solomon. Now, King Solomon notoriously made a few mistakes. He got involved in a series of political marriages that were symbolic of political alliance with surrounding kingdoms. This wasn't uncommon practice at the time, but the princesses that Solomon married had a distinct effect on him, and he ended up putting up altars of foreign gods that were worshipped in the surrounding kingdoms. Unfortunately, including the god of Molech, notorious for child sacrifice. Now, I don't know if you know this, but actually the God of the Bible does not condone child sacrifice. People on the internet will for some reason tell you differently. In fact, the binding of Isaac that we talked about earlier is a story that is supposed to convey that God would never actually condone behavior like that at all. Therefore, the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this has been your practice and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Yet, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son." Now this, along with some other factors, resulted in the splitting of the kingdom of Israel into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Now both kingdoms would continually degrade over the years and ignore the prophets sent by God, and the chronicler records in 2 Chronicles 36:15 regarding the southern kingdom of Judah, "The Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words, and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy." So this brings us back to Daniel 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and placed the vessels in the treasury of his God. Okay, so now we have a fuller context. We know that the reason that God is giving the king of Judah into the hands of King Nebuchadnezzar, it's because of southern Judah's own rebellion against God himself. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, chief eunuch, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. Essentially what we have here is King Nebuchadnezzar commanding his chief eunuch, and if you don't know what a eunuch is, it is a male that has had his valuable assets removed from him. And he commands this chief eunuch to essentially culturally assimilate these young Jewish men. And you may be asking, who are the Chaldeans? What's that about? Well, it's actually a really simple answer. Chaldea is in the southern portion of Babylon. Nothing too complicated about that. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and of the wine they drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belteshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. There's actually a lot of important information for us in this portion of the text. First, Nebuchadnezzar prescribes a dietary regimen for these young Jewish boys, and there's an implication, men, and there's an implication later in the text that this dietary regimen did not align with the dietary laws set in Leviticus and Deuteronomy in the Torah. And if you don't know what the Torah is, it refers to the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Secondly, to further the cultural assimilation, these young men with the Hebrew names Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are given Babylonian names: Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And one odd thing worth pointing out is that in the book of Daniel, Daniel is just referred to by his Hebrew name, Daniel. But his friends, for the most part, I think there is an exception, but for the most part are just referred to by their new Babylonian names, and I don't know why, but it's kind of interesting. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief eunuch to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, "I fear my lord the king, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king." Now, because presumably Daniel would be defiling himself with the king's food because it breaks Levitical dietary law, David asks the chief eunuch to let him not do that. Now, kind of naturally, the chief eunuch becomes concerned because the lacking physical condition of Daniel and his buddies is going to reflect poorly because they're under the chief eunuch's supervision. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, that's their Hebrew names that time, "Test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you, and deal with your servants according to what you see." So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. So Daniel sort of offers up this challenge where he says, hey, after 10 days, me and my Hebrew buddies, we're just going to eat vegetables. And by the end of the 10 days, we are going to be the big beefy guys. And, and those dirtbags eating the king's food are going to look weak. At the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate the king's food. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. So Daniel's gambit pays off, and I think it's safe to say that it was only through some otherworldly, miraculous means that these Hebrew guys eating only vegetables and drinking water were able to get more swole than the guys on the high-protein diet. Though I will say Paul McCartney is in fact vegan, and he's in pretty good shape for his age, so, you know, maybe there's something to it. And this is sort of off topic, but there is an implication that back in the Garden of Eden, that Adam and Eve were vegetarians, though maybe we'll do another video about that, but I am not a vegetarian, that is for sure. As for these 4 youths, God gave them understanding and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. At the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king spoke with them, and among all of them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. So the text concludes with God giving the 4 youths exceptional academic skill and growth in wisdom. But Daniel specifically gets a more unique ability from God, and that is the ability to interpret visions and dreams. And it's worth mentioning that this isn't the first time that we've seen a biblical character in a foreign land be given the power to interpret visions and dreams and climb up the political ladder. Some of you might be familiar with the story of Joseph, where this precise thing happens. As you start to read your Bible more as a cohesive story, you start to notice more of these patterns when it comes to biblical characters, stories, Israel. Another thing to address is the writer says that the 4 Hebrew youths are found to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in the kingdom. Now, a very natural response to the modern reader would be, well, the writer's certainly not talking about actual magicians and actual enchanters, right? Like, that would be preposterous. They're certainly talking about people who just do visual illusions and tricks. However, when we read these from an ancient Israelite perspective, I just don't think we can say that. For example, let's look at God condemning several of these kinds of practices in Deuteronomy. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer or a charmer or medium or a necromancer, or who inquires of the dead. You know, the first thing to know, obviously, is that the biblical writer doesn't just turn around and say, but I'm not talking about real divination or real necromancy or real sorcery. Now, if you're taking the Bible as it presents itself, or how the biblical writers present it, these things are very real, according to the text. I think there's this modern attempt to despiritualize the text to simply make it more digestible for the modern reader, but I don't think that's very smart to do, and I think it makes the Bible harder to interpret. Here's a more explicit example. In 1 Samuel 28, King Saul wants to consult the dead prophet Samuel. So he disguises himself and secretly meets with a medium and wants to ask Samuel why God has turned against him, kind of ironically. But here's the thing, it works. Anyway, if you're interested in anything like that, I recommend The Unseen Realm by Michael Heiser. Sorry, that ended up kind of being a side tangent, but moral of the story, Daniel is a really interesting book, and chapter 1 really acts as an introduction to the role that Daniel is going to play in the whole of the book.